the book of Proverbs in the 10th chapter. I love singing those scripture songs. I sing them going down the road, kind of gets a little jingle in my head, and it helps me, and I enjoy singing them. Proverbs chapter number 10, if you would. Don't forget that this coming Sunday, I think it's Daylight Savings Time this weekend, and Brother Tim Green will be with us all day, Evangelist Tim Green, and so we'll look forward to that. Proverbs chapter number 10, we're going through the book of Proverbs on Wednesday night and just kind of hitting and missing through it, not trying to go verse by verse through it. And a couple of weeks ago, we said that in chapter 10, there's a change in the structure or the format of the book. The first 9 chapters are conversational. It's a dialogue, my son, my son, my son. And chapter 10 starts what we think of when we think of a proverb, these little short sayings. And we talked about the parallelism, how that Hebrew poetry doesn't depend on rhyming, it's more structure. And so you have these parallels, a positive and a negative, a positive and a negative, and they're not grouped by any particular subject, they're just in there. And really chapter 10 through 15 are more contrast. Chapter 16 through 22 are more comparisons, so you can kind of think of it that way. And so we come to Proverbs chapter 10, and it's just starting out with all of these sayings. And basically what it's doing is giving you 2 choices. Most every verse gives you 2 choices. And I thought about life, how that we complicate life. Life really is not that complicated. One of the things that complicates life is we have too many options in everything. Too many options. And I think about Brother Ron Ralph preaching that message on choices and options, and there's just options everywhere. The Bible doesn't lay out a lot of choices. It basically lays out 2. Life, death, heaven, hell, righteousness, wickedness, wisdom, folly, broad path, narrow path, all right? And that's pretty much how it's laid out. And so the book of Proverbs, it lays out these contrasts, these two different things. And we're not looking at every one of them, just kind of going through them. And I kind of made my way down to verse number 12 last week that I was here. And so I'm just going to pick it up in verse number 13 and kind of make my way down to the end of the chapter and just kind of mention a few of them that stand out to me. But I want you to notice in verse number 13 that there is something about wisdom. He says something about wisdom. Look at verse 13. In the lips of him that hath understanding, wisdom is found. But a rod is for the back of him that is void of understanding. So he stands 2 men side by side. One of them has understanding and the other is void of understanding. To be void is empty. It's empty space there, all right? The elevator doesn't go all the way to the top floor. So he has facts, but he doesn't understand the facts. He doesn't know what to do with the facts. It doesn't translate into living. So there's the contrast between a man that has understanding and a man that doesn't have understanding. And the Bible has a lot to say about understanding. And well, not tonight, but you could do a cross-reference on all the things the Bible says that you ought to understand. There are some men that don't understand God. They don't understand life. They don't understand that there is an eternity. They don't have understanding of spiritual things. And when a man speaks, he's telling you if he has any understanding. Because the lips of him that speaketh tells you if there's any understanding there. You've heard a fellow speak and it dawns upon you he has no idea what he's talking about. He's just talking. His mouth moves and words come out and it's kind of like that senator in Pennsylvania, John Fetterman. He got no idea what he's talking about. Just words come out. So you have a contrast. But the part of the verse that I wanted to point out to you is in the end of verse 13. But a rod is for the back of him that is void of understanding. Now, when we read rod, what we want to do is we want to sanitize that and help God out just a little bit, all right? We surely don't mean hit somebody with a rod, to beat them with a rod. I mean a rod. So we want to kind of help somebody out right there. But by the way, this is not talking about children. There are verses, and we'll get to them, about beating a child with a rod and he will not die. Spare the rod. And so there are verses about a rod. And there are parents that read that and think, well, it can't be talking about a rod. I mean, like a switch rod, or it can't be talking about a rod, because rather it be a timeout or stand in the corners. I mean, surely God doesn't expect us to take a rod or a belt or a paddle. So we got to help God out a little bit, because it's so harsh, so brutal, so barbaric. It's so mean. And so what we have is a generation of adults that nobody took a rod to. And so they grew up without any discipline, without any character, without any integrity, and they're lazy and they're selfish. And now they're raising their children to be little carbon copies of themselves. And I'm kind of thinking, maybe a rod would help. That's what God says, a rod. In fact, I think a rod would fix a lot of foolishness that's in our country. We don't live in the city, so we don't see this here. But in the cities, they have people that'll walk up to somebody and just hit them. It's called the knockout game. Just for no reason, they'll walk up to an elderly person, just punch them, see if you knock them out. Or you've seen the news accounts in New York City where they push somebody off the subway platform in front of them. So I'll tell you what helped that is a rod. A rod will help a lot of that. But here's what we do. We put them in prison and feed them 3 meals a day and let them watch TV all day. And our prisons are overpopulated, so it doesn't seem to be working, by the way. Right? Did you know that in colonial America, now we would never want to go back to those days, but do you know in colonial America, you know what they used? They used a rod. You catch a man stealing something, they would take him to the town square, tie him to a post, and take a whip, and they would whip him. Oh, that's so mean. Well, stealing is mean too. Right? That ain't nice. That's what they would do. That's what they do. If you would bring corporal punishment back into the public schools, it'd probably stop a lot of foolishness goes in there. I mean, some of those kids that have never had a rod, it probably helped them quit acting like a fool. You had a rod, all of you adults, you had a rod when you was growing up, helped you, didn't it? I had a rod. I would tell you right now, there ain't none of y'all's daddies ever whipped as hard as mine. I'm just telling you, all right? My sisters, they ain't never had no real whipping. It's the reason why they act like they do. I remember one time when I was real little, I don't know why I tell the story, but I will anyway. I remember one time I was real little, we lived in that trailer park over there in Inslee, and I was in trouble for something, and my oldest sister, Crystal, I was going to get a whipping, and my dad gave me a choice between a belt and a switch, and I'd never had a whipping with a switch before. And evidently she had never had either. And she said, oh, get the switch. It can't hurt. Just get the switch. So I took the option of the switch. It did hurt. I've never forgiven her about that since. Amen. Would they call you to come pick up your kid from school because he's misbehaving? If you give him a rod instead of a candy bar, you may not have to go pick him up tomorrow. Proverbs 25 and verse 3, a whip for the horse, a bridle for the ass, and a rod for the fool's back. Amen. Deuteronomy 25:2 says, in the Bible, and it shall be if the wicked man be worthy to be beaten, that the judge shall cause him to lie down and to be beaten before his face according to his fault by a certain number. 40 stripes he may give him and not exceed, lest if he should exceed and beat him above these with many stripes, then thy brother should seem vile unto thee. How about that? Oh, that's so mean and that's so barbaric and that's so cruel. Well, what we're doing now is not working. Amen. Word about wisdom. Look at verse number 14. Wise men lay up knowledge, but the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. How do you lay up knowledge? How do you do that? Well, reading good books will probably help you. Listening to sermons. I listened to 3 sermons today. 3 sermons a day. None of them were really any good, but I listened to 3 sermons a day. I'm trying to find somebody new to listen to. Listen to good preaching. Listen to older people. There's all kinds of ways to lay up knowledge. You know, every sermon that you hear is not life-changing. It really isn't. But if you'll digest enough of them, it will change your life. You may hear a sermon and you don't really need it for today, but store it up. Because there might come a day when you need that message. Read good books and good literature and listen to wise men talking. You store it away. The fool, he don't have time to listen. Which is why he's always on the brink of disaster. He just jumps from one crisis to the next crisis to the next crisis to the next disaster. He is $1 away. He's one day away from the next destruction. So he says something about wisdom. Then in verse number 15, there is something about wealth. He says the rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. Now you'll notice in this verse there's no instruction, it's just information. He doesn't tell you anything to do, but he's telling you something to know. And in the statement, he doesn't say whether wealth is good or bad. He doesn't say anything positive or negative about money, about the morality of it. So he's not condemning it, he's not condoning it. He is passing on an observation that he has made in life. And observation is a good skill to have. Just to sit back and to watch. Just to watch. Haven't been to a mall in a long, long time. It'll be a long time before I ever go to a mall again. But isn't it fun to go to a mall and sit down on the mall bench and just observe? Just watch people go by. Hey, how easy it is to judge people that you've never met before. He's got money. He ain't got no money. She's married. She ain't never getting married. Just observing. Just observing. Huh? 7 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon said, I have seen. I'm just sitting back and I'm just watching. So he's making an observation. And the observation is that the rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. Now there's two ways to read this verse, and there's a positive way and a negative way, and I'll let you decide which way that you want to take it. But the first is that the rich people have more protections than the poor people. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. If you have money, you can buy better health care. You can buy a security system for your house. You can buy a bodyguard. You could buy a lawyer if you're taken to court. The very wealthy can afford to buy the way out of trouble. Buy a politician if you need one. But the wealthy, their wealth is their defense. We live in a 2-tier justice system. If you're very wealthy and you're in trouble, then you can buy your battery of lawyers and probably get out of it. But if you're real poor and you've got to have a public defender, you're probably going to take a plea agreement, right? And you get better care at the hospital if money is no concern. So he's just stating a fact. If you have money, it can be like a strong city for your life. That's one way to take the verse. But there's another way that you could possibly take that verse, and that is that money gives you a sense of security, while poverty gives you a sense of weakness. The key word for me would be the rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. It could be telling you what you think when you have money. Because people, when they have money, they think differently when they don't. I'm telling you that if I have a roll of $100 bills in my pocket, if I have a roll of dollar bills in my pocket, I just walk a little taller than I do if I ain't got no money. I'll usually stick a couple $100 in my pocket and I'll see how long I can go without breaking it, because once you break it, then you spent the whole thing, right? But you just get, and when I've got that money in my pocket, I just feel a little cockier. It's just the way that it is. When you have money, you feel like there's nothing you can't handle. When you don't have money, you feel like there's nothing that you can handle. Wealth makes us feel more secure than what we are, but poverty makes us feel more vulnerable than what we are. So he says something about wealth. Look down in verse number 22. He says, the blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich. And here's an interesting statement. And he addeth no sorrow with it. If you're blessed by God, that's true riches. And though you will have sorrow in life, the blessings of God does not add sorrow to your life. All of us are going to have sorrow. I mean, man, few are his days and full of trouble. You can chase after wealth in a worldly fashion and get wealth, and brings all kinds of sorrows. Covetousness and greed, and you get what you want, but just sorrow comes with it. But when the Lord blesses you, no sorrow that comes with that. You can get rich, but destroy your marriage. That's sorrow. That's not the blessing of God. So he says something about wealth. Come back to verse number 16. He's going to say something about work. Verse 16. The labor of the righteous tendeth to life, the fruit of the wicked to sin. Now here's another statement. It is observation. It's not instruction. But the observation is intended to give us some inspiration. That's what it's intended. And notice here that the righteous worketh. The labor of the righteous tendeth to life. However, there is no action attributed to the wicked. The fruit of the wicked to sin. Now the reason why is because work is intentional. It is something that you get up in the morning and you go do. But fruit is unintentional. Fruit happens whether you do anything or not. You bear fruit. It's worded that way. You bear fruit, but it's the fruit of the wicked. An apple tree doesn't try to produce apples. It just is an apple tree. It doesn't have to work. It is automatic. It is unintentional. And as long as it is an apple tree, it produces apple. Working is different though. The labor of the righteous tendeth to life. It doesn't take any work for me to sit and relax in a recliner all day, but it does take work for me to paint a house and to cut the grass and prepare a sermon. You got to do something. So the righteous man labors, and his labor tends toward life. The wicked man, now watch this, the wicked man doesn't do anything, and the fruit of it is that it produces sin. One is hard and the other is easier. It is harder to labor than to just sit back and life overtake you and allow the fruit of inactivity produce what it normally produces. So there is a hint that the hard path is better than the easy path. That there is a hint that the good life comes from doing not the easy thing, but it comes from doing the hard thing. Yeah. If we do what comes easy and naturally, it produces sin. But if we do what requires discipline and makes us sweat and gives us a tired back, then what most likely will happen is it tendeth to life. It takes no effort to let your eyes wander, but it tends to lust. It takes no effort to let your heart wander, but it tends to unforgiveness. It takes no effort to let your mind wander, but it tends to discontentment. And what you have to do every day is you have to get up and you have to work against your natural tendencies. If you will work to discipline your eyes, if you will work to discipline your ears, if you will work to discipline your mind, it will tend to life. So something about work. Look at verse 26. As vinegar to the teeth and as smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard. There is work, is the sluggard to them that send him. Now, you know, I don't know that I've ever had vinegar in the teeth. I've tasted vinegar. It's pretty bitter. I have had smoke in my eyes. You know, when you're building a fire and you smoke something, you get over on the other side where the wind's not blowing. You don't stand there and let the smoke. And here's what I thought about. Smoke in the eyes is very irritating. It's not harmful. It's just irritating. Right? It just irritates. Lazy people, they're irritating. Right? If I had a business, if I had a business and I always had workers that wouldn't show up at work on time, calling in sick every other Friday, always knocking off early, I would be irritated. I would. We working on the house, flipping that house, and we had an electrician that was coming and going to wire the house, and then he got arrested. Well, that's wonderful. Huh? Whatever time they tell you they're showing up, they're not showing up then. I guarantee you that. All right? And it's just, so don't ask a lazy man to do anything, because all you're going to do, you're just going to get irritated. It's going to be like smoke in the eye, smoke in the eyes. Well, there is something about words. Something about words. Look at verse number 19. In the multitude of words there wanteth not sin, but he that refraineth his lips is wise. Now, it's not an ironclad rule. There are exceptions. But the general principle is that sin is usually present in the multitude of words. Yeah. Solomon seems to say that there is a direct correlation between words and sin. He seems to say that there is a correlation between the more words that you say, the greater chance you have at sinning. Is that what he says? In the multitude of words, there wanteth not sin. So a good way to not sin, not the only way, but a good way to not sin is refrain your lips. He says, in the multitude of words, there wanteth not sin, but he that refraineth his lips is wise. Now, I'm not going to make it an ironclad rule, because sometimes you got to talk, and you got to talk a lot. When you preach, you talk a lot. Okay? There's a lot of talking. You might lecture. You might be a teacher. Brother Jeff, he talks a lot every day. So that's not what that's talking about, all right? Think about it. The more a person talks, the greater chance he has at sinning. The more you talk, the greater chance you have at saying something that you should not. Right? The more that you talk, the greater chance you have of saying something that's untrue, something that's hurtful, something that is false, something that is foolish. So the more that you open your mouth, you're taking a chance that something sinful is going to come out. The University of Arizona did a survey years ago, and they took 350 people, something like 350 people, and somehow they tracked them for 8 years to try to see how many words a person speaks every day. And they finally, at the end of this long study, they concluded that the average person speaks 16,000 words a day. There's a woman's joke right there, and I'm not even going to tell it. 16,000 words, 16,000 chances a day. To build up or tear down? I wonder how many of my 16,000 words today were idle words. Something about words. How many times have you and I had to apologize for something we said? How many times have you had to apologize for something you didn't say? Not as many, did you? It's hard not to say what you want to say, but you ought not say, but you really want to say. So some of you husbands and wives, when you get into an argument, and the argument never ends because you can't decide who's going to have the last word. Huh? Somebody, you just have to, even if it's a grunt. But you got it in. Huh? You got to have the last say. Look at verse number 20. The tongue of the just is as choice silver, the heart of the wicked is little worth. Now that's the opposite of verse number 19. Because in verse number 19, if you just read verse number 19, then you would conclude the best thing to do is just don't say anything. Just don't talk altogether. That's not the conclusion. Verse number 20, it's just that when we speak choice words. You can't have a marriage without communication. You got to talk, all right? But when you do, make sure it is choice word. Choice word. He said the tongue of the just is as choice silver. The word choice in the Bible, it's the best. It talks about choice young men and a choice vine. It is the best of something. All silver is not created equally. There is some silver that has impurities in it. Then there is pure silver. There is choice silver. So make sure that when you speak that your words have less impurities. It's choice words. Choice words. It might not be smart. It might not be eloquent. But is it good? Is it good? Is it good? He seems to be drawing a line between words and righteousness. Words and righteousness. He says, the lips of the right, he says, in the multitude of words there wanteth not sin. He that refraineth his lips from is wise. He says in verse number 20, the tongue of the just is as choice silver, the heart of the wicked is little worth. He says in verse 21, the lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom. There's something about words. And then I want you to notice he says something about the wicked. Look at verse 23. Now really verse 23 down to verse 32, it's a comparison between the righteous and the wicked. So look at verse 23. It is as sport to a fool to do mischief. Now, when we think of sports, we think of sport like basketball, baseball, an athletic game. But in the Bible, the word sport's only found about 9 times, and it has to do with pleasure, has to do with entertainment. The first time, in fact, look at it, Genesis 26. Genesis chapter 26, I'll show you the first instance of it. Genesis 26, and I heard a man preach on this verse one time, and I never forgot it. But Genesis 26 and verse number 8. And it came to pass when he'd been there a long time that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah, his wife. They weren't playing basketball. Okay? Do I need to explain that? He's flirting with her. That's what he's doing. Now here's the wonderful thing about it. If I can remember right now, he's either 60 or 80 at this point. Yeah. Still anyway. He's sporting with Rebekah, his wife. When they took Samson and they brought him into that threshing floor and they're going to make him grind, put his eyes out, they did it to make sport of him. So sport is entertainment. It is pleasure. So come back to our verse. He says, it is sport to a fool to do mischief. It's entertainment. It's just a game. It's something fun to do. That's these fools that play the knockout game. There's no reason to do that. It's sport. Fools do dangerous things because they think it is fun. Let's spin donuts in the parking lot. Let's ride on the hood of the car going down the highway. Hang out the window, knock mailboxes over. Let's drive a motorcycle with no hands. A sport. By the way, you can tell, and I'll be done. You can measure the maturity of a young man by how he drives. If he's got to be fast, got to beat you to Burger King, he's a child. That's what he is, man. Just want to prove how fast I can drive. Because you're still in kindergarten. 17, there was two guys, play somebody and be in two different parts of the world. You young guys don't want to talk about. And so they were playing this game called Call of Duty, and they got into a dispute over $1.50. Somehow you make money or lose money with the game, I don't know. But they got into a dispute over $1.50. And the fella that felt like he was owed $1.50 from the other man he was playing decided that he was, and they show up at their house, the police show up at the house, and it's a fake call. That's really a dangerous, dumb thing to do. So the fella that is owed $1.50 decides he's going to swat this fella. Well, this fella gives him a fake address. And this fella calls 911 and reports a violent crime actually at the address that this man gave him. Andrew Finch is a 28-year-old man sitting in his house in Wichita, Kansas, and the door starts knocking. And it's the SWAT team at his house, guns drawn. He comes to the door, has no idea why they're there. And in the confusion, a police officer shot him. And a father of two is dead. An innocent man is dead, had no idea what was going on. A man that had a dispute over $1.50, he's in prison 20 years. And a police officer lives for the rest of his life knowing that he shot an innocent man. It's sport. Sport to a fool to do mischief. Let me look at verse 24. I'll try to end here. The fear of the wicked, it shall come upon him, but the desire of the righteous shall be granted. You know, if Solomon wanted to make a contrast when he says the fear of the wicked shall come upon him, but the desire of the righteous shall be granted. It seems like that punishment and reward might be a better contrast. I don't know. But he contrasts the fear of the wicked with the desire of the righteous. That's the contrast. Fear and desire are rooted in every heart. Everybody has fears and everybody has desires. But with the favor of God, or without the favor of God, the wicked will have their worst fears realized. But with the favor of God, the righteous can have their best desires granted. So, oh, wait a minute. God doesn't always bring every fear upon the wicked. God doesn't always bring every desire upon the righteous. There's wicked people that didn't get everything they deserved. There's righteous people that deserve more than what they got. And it's always been a conundrum for God's people. I'll end with this verse, Psalm 21, and I'll show you the key to it. Psalm 21, look at verse number 2. Thou hast given him his heart's desire, the righteous and the wicked, and there's no greater contrast in the world. How they talk, how they live, their philosophy on life, how they are influenced by things, their hopes, their fears, their desires, their motivations. There is no greater contrast. And life is not complicated. It's this one or that one. It is righteousness or it is wickedness. That's what it is. I have a letter in my office, got it today. It's one of the saddest letters I ever read in my life. One of the saddest. Preacher's wife. Preacher's wife. Called his name, some of you might know him. Preacher's wife had to write the letter. Husband got caught, 3-year long affair. Another woman. He's out of the ministry, selling everything, going to take a job. And the wife had to write the letter and saying, don't support, it's over, getting a job, staying with him, which I commend her for that. But what shame. What shame upon that woman. Life is not complicated. Wisdom, foolish. Righteousness, wickedness. You can take either one of them that you want. It's two roads. It's not many. It's just two. Well, we'll stop right there. We'll pick up chapter 11. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord. We'll deal with that next week.